All right, guys. How are you guys doing? Welcome to another episode of Media Inquisitor, and we're starting a new series today, psychological creative analysis series. I'm starting out with Flea, who is best known as the bassist of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So we're gonna do a little like report-based, psychological analysis, quote unquote. That's not that deep in order to try to give these people some respect. That's all more so just like a contextual summary of various reports online. That's super try to make it as report based as possible in order to respect the artists and not give inaccurate information, which would ultimately be a very corrupt form of media. And then after that, I'm just gonna give my opinion and my personal thoughts on the uh, disposition they go about creating art. So I feel really bad. I don't know Flea's full name. Oh wait, yeah, I do. Michael Balzary. So Flea is the bassist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, like I mentioned already. He grew up in Rye, upstate New York, Australia, and Hollywood. And a little context on Hollywood because I feel like most people watching this series are Generation Z, and uh, you know, a lot of my boys from Colgate live in Los Angeles, and they will tell you this. Like, 1980s Hollywood was like a lot different in the sense that uh, the GDP was like a lot lower. It was like a super middle class area. So Flea moved there when he was around junior high, and from a young age he was still um, wild. For one, he was just like a naturally wild and energetic person, and his mom left his biological father for a classical artist by the name of Walter Abdul Urban Jr. Um, Strangely, Flea was actually super productive in junior high, and what I mean by that is like he was a super active boy, and in his memoir "Acid for the Children," he reflects on his own times doing introspection on sin, because and a side note, Flea is notably super religious as he prays every night, and he he in interviews it's referenced that he prays every night, and he doesn't have a I don't think he stresses too much about the formal title of his religion, but if I were to put a name on it for our viewers, I would say, and don't quote me on this, it's like a transcendental Christian based religion, but it could also be linked to Buddhism or something like that. Um, but yeah, like I was saying, Flea was both wild and productive. A great example of him being productive is that he would wake up like around like 6 or 7 a.m. During ninth, 10th grade, junior high, and he would play basketball for 2 hours. And he would spend many hours in the park playing basketball. Also, when his home life became rough, you can also see this productivity mindset because like one day when his stepfather, who was notably aggressive, um, was being a little bit more aggressive than usual, Flea did karate for 12 hours. So this wasn't a guy who would dwell as much as he would act, which you'll see once he develops his professional career. You could see the same exact mindset. And that's where I'll bring my next point. So, around 1997, the Chili Peppers were about to disband as a group for a multitude of different reasons. And Flea was actually able to bring John back into the band, who's a guitarist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and one of their two most important. Well, there's three main Red Hot Chili Peppers guitarists: Hillel Slovak, the founder, John Frusciante, and Josh Klinghoffer. So, yeah, the Flea acted as the glue in the band, and he also, when John left the second time, he would jam with John alone, and Flea also spent a lot of time with classical bassists. He spent a lot of time on the trumpet in high school and junior high. And yeah, and this brings me into my next point. So Flea's philosophy is anti-egotistical productivity. He makes a point in his life to consciously introspect a lot on what it means to be empathetically productive. And a great example of this from his memoir is that I'm paraphrasing here, but he remembers looking at his junior high report card once he moved to Los Angeles, and he would look at the grades and he would be like, yeah, I could get good grades, but then again, I would just be doing that for my ego. So I don't want to do that because it's just for my ego. So he saw running the streets of Los Angeles and hanging out with his friend Anthony Kiedis, who would become the frontman for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, as a means of productivity that wasn't for satiating his ego, but was rather for something bigger than himself. And he's also quoted in interviews saying exactly this. A great example of this is from the documentary series, or the documentary Blood Sugar Sex Magic. I'm paraphrasing here, but he's quoted saying that, like, the point of the Red Hot Chili Peppers is as much expression as possible, and like a doctor can be a Red Hot Chili Pepper, a prisoner can be a Red Hot Chili Pepper. It's just whether or not they feel the energy. So from a young age, junior high, Flea saw labels that wouldn't allow him to be as reckless as possible, as the enemy. And another example of this from his memoir is that, or no, a key pivotal character development moment in Flea from around his teens and 20s to his 30s and 40s was introspecting on his recklessness and realizing that this was also a part of his ego, as he's quoted multiple times in his memoir saying, I wanted to push the lines as far as possible because, like, I thought I was, being, like, egoless and selfless by doing so, but then I realized I was just, like, damaging other people's feelings. And a great example of this is, like, he was being reckless and joking around with Jack Irons, one of the two original drummers for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, about poop. And he put poop in a bag and he gave it to Jack for his birthday. But then, like, the rest of the band was like, dude, like, you gave him shit in front of his mother. Like, you gave him literal shit in front of his mother. Like, what the fuck did you just do? And, yeah, so Flea kind of, like, captained the band as, he saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He was able to essentially captain the band in the sense of being the glue guy for around, like, 20 to 30 years, ever since, Hillel died, who was pretty much, like, the kind of, like, point guard, per se, of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So, I guess this leads me to my last point, which is that my thesis of my report on Flea is that he ultimately developed learning the quote-unquote hard way, meaning learning directly from living experience, what it means to go from recklessness to discipline. A great example of this is Flea's lifestyle habits in his 20s and teens was running around in the streets, waking up super early, playing a lot of basketball, doing a lot of drugs. And there's a great example of this being both reckless and productive and disciplined, right? There's a quote in his memoir or report where a bunch of his friends were getting strung out on heroin, but the reason that he didn't get strung out and kept it to the weekends was because he valued his productivity within the week so much, whether that was shooting hoops or running the streets. And there's a paradoxical blend here of this both being recklessness and discipline. And you guys might think I'm crazy, but I hate to break it to you, but it is discipline, even if you're running around in the streets. I firmly believe that it takes effort to run around in the, like, streets of Los Angeles. Like, honestly, it might even be more draining than me. Like, going to because I'm a privileged kid, I'm pretty much the opposite of Flea, going to my prep school or something like that. But Flea ultimately developed out of his recklessness into intense discipline, in his middle ages, he becomes much more of a classical bassist. He spends a lot of time outside of the main band that he makes the most amount of money in, and he spends a lot of time developing with other artists. He goes completely sober, and his sleeping habits also improve. So the man developed into calm discipline. And just my personal thoughts on Flea's philosophy as a person. Oh, I guess one big chunk before I end this report that I forgot is that Flea had reports of a vivid imagination and imaginary friends that he created, and he almost folded on to himself because of parental neglect and abuse. So he had this like kind of like ball. He had a figurative ball of emotions that he was carrying around like a balloon, which would become or would the symptom of the boiled up balloon of emotions due to trauma was immense creativity within himself, meaning he was imagining rather than actually painting all day. And he also is quoted that he uses instruments and running around in the street before he stopped running around in the street as an outlet to kind of put a needle in this balloon. But nonetheless, the balloon of imaginary friends was always there. Another note on Flea, he respected nature a lot, and he loves to reiterate and introspect on realizing that he's not that big of a person. And the two examples from his memoir are him going on a hike in the backwoods of God. How can I say all of this about Flea and forget the name of the massive national park in LA? It's not Yellowstone. What the fuck is it called? The Woods. That's what it is. Everyone who's watching probably knows the national park I'm talking. Oh, Yosemite. There we go. In the backwoods of Yosemite, he's quoted in the memoir saying like, "Yeah, like I'm just like a little speck, and the world is much more significant than just me." And another great quote that I like is at the beginning of his memoir in a poem. He ends the poem by saying, "Being famous don't mean shit." Another great example of him trying to view himself as under God as possible is, um, which is kind of funny. You guys can look up this clip, but a YouTube short, some fucking jackass went up to him and like, "What do you do for a living?" Those videos in New York City, and Flea just screamed at him, was like, "Get out of my face." Now you might think that's being egotistical. No, because someone who like thinks of what they do as grandiose would actually answer the reporter and be like, "Yeah, I do XYZ." But this dude is almost aggressive in the way he introspects towards himself. He actually is aggressive. He has a very radical introspective mindset of trying to eliminate the ego as much as possible. And the grades example is a great example of this because he was noted on actually getting straight A's in his second semester of 8th grade. But that being said, he got straight A's and he hated it because he felt like it was his ego. So picture Flea's brain has a massive red axe and it's going around at all times trying to aggressively chomp off the ego wherever it may be. My personal take on Flea's creative philosophy and his upbringing is that it is a very aggressive mindset, but it has led to extreme discipline. To all my viewers out there, if you want to be great at what you do, like this mindset is one that will ultimately make you great because not only is he constantly grounding himself by using that red axe to chop his ego, but he's also expressing himself on a daily basis. This is a common mindset you could see in many people who are successful who try to eliminate their ego as much as possible and boost productivity as much as possible. Obviously, Flea is his own person. We need to give him his own respect. But I definitely respect him as an artist, and it takes an extreme amount of discipline and self-introspection to reach his level of both creative discipline and creative expression. And I think Flea, on a practical level, is also impressive in the way he can also be super aggressive on the bass, be super funky on the bass, but be super classical on the bass. That combination is extremely rare all in one person, and we could see that he has achieved that due to using an instrument as a raw creative outlet, but also being aggressive on himself, and then also giving himself discipline. Again, three common traits in many successful people. So yeah, enjoy.